Hello, and welcome to Chapter 5, which is going to be based on gender. Now, your textbook makes a very good observation, which is very, very true, and that is what is usually the first question a woman or her partner is asked when they tell people they're expecting a child? Do you know if it's a girl or a boy? Most people don't even wait until the baby's born to find out. They want to know as soon as possible. Now, there are some very practical reasons behind this as well, wanting to prepare a room or what color of clothes to buy. But that also plays into our focus this week, which is gender socialization, which I'm going to speak about in a moment. We don't think of it often, but from birth onward, gender really does play a large part in organizing the way we think about other people, in addition to how we think about ourselves. It organizes how we think, at least in part, about people's abilities and characteristics and personalities and traits and their interests and how they should be. It kind of creates a frame through which we view everything. And gender affects how we interact with family, academic performance in school, sexuality, a whole range of issues regarding development. And it's one of the foundations of development during adolescence and emerging adulthood. Now, gender is one of my absolute favorite things to discuss. What makes a person masculine or feminine? Or more specifically, why do we view certain things in our environment as suitable for girls or boys? Clothes, hairstyles, hair colors, jewelry, behaviors, interests, hobbies, even names for people. Now, gender is a term I think we're all familiar with. I think most of you know it doesn't refer to being biologically male or female, what parts you have. Instead, it refers to the social and cultural aspects of being male or female. Gender refers to the social categories of male and female that are established based on cultural beliefs, not on biology. So, it refers to the characteristics associated with being male or the characteristics associated with being female. So the two key words here are social and cultural. This means then that the characteristics associated with being masculine or feminine might and probably will change according to the society you live in and perhaps the region in that society. So what it means to be masculine or feminine varies cross-culturally according to what things are considered to be masculine or feminine in that society or region. Our society has actually not always acknowledged a distinction between biological sex and gender. It wasn't until the 1950s this happened. The World Health Organization defines gender as socially constructed ideas about the behavior, actions, and roles a particular sex performs. So, depending on which society you're in, these beliefs are socially constructed. Values are socially constructed. Attitudes are socially constructed. What behaviors we think are or are not appropriate are socially constructed. And again, the key term here obviously is socially constructed. In other words, there are at least generally agreeable norms that are socially constructed according to the society you're in, that most of society agrees on. Individual people may have dissenting opinions, and certainly some do, especially now when what it means to be masculine or feminine is much more fluid. It's not as exact. And there certainly is a spectrum of gender now, as it's not as absolutely concrete as it was previously. But the personal opinions of some individuals in society is not what constitutes a definition of those social constructs for society as a whole. It's the perceptions and ideas and attitudes and values of society in general. This is why it takes so long, why it's such a slow process for ideas about gender to change and evolve. And we now have all sorts of different terms to explain various aspects of gender. Gender identity, gender roles, gender expectations, gender socialization. We all do gender. It's not something you just are, it's something that each of us actively do. and it's accomplished through our day-to-day behavior and choices and interactions. Every single day, everybody does certain things and acts in certain ways that indicate that they're doing gender. So they make choices, either consciously or subconsciously. For example, appearance. We manage our appearance according to our gender. How we style our hair, how we do or do not color our hair, what we put in our hair, and our society's normative expectations regarding gender have an effect on all of that. We manage our appearance in terms of our clothes, what we choose to wear. So, for example, we rarely see a boy or a man wearing a skirt. The style of our clothes, the color of our clothes. And I still remember when it was a big thing, a huge thing, if a guy wore a pink shirt. This would have been in the 80s. And even once that became more of the norm, if a guy did wear a pink shirt, he was perceived as, oh, he's really enlightened. He's a really forward-thinking kind of person. So our society's normative expectations regarding gender have an effect on all of this. We manage ourselves every single day regarding our language, our choice of words, how we say them regarding tone of voice and volume. We manage ourselves every day regarding our conduct, what we actually do during the day to keep ourselves busy. So gender is not something that just exists. It's not something that just is there. It's something we actually produce by our own actions repeatedly. So in other words, people are supposed to act in ways that line up with their presumed sex and thus their gender. We expect people we think are female to act like women, and we expect people we think are male to act like men. So the question is, how do we learn all these normative expectations for our gender? Well, through gender socialization, the process through which cultures communicate gender expectations to children and adolescents. Kids learn at a really early age what it means to be a boy or a girl in our society through a whole range of ways, and this is going to continue through your whole life. They're guided by their parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, babysitters, daycare providers, teachers, coaches. They're guided by less personal sources like TV shows, TV commercials, music videos, magazines, the internet overall, YouTube. And now, in addition, we have social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. And anybody who teaches you, anything that teaches you, contribute to children experiencing the process of gender socialization. Has progress been made regarding gender expectations? Absolutely, in virtually every way possible. If you think of Canadian society in 1950 and compare that to what our world is like now, certainly progress has been made. Politically, socially, regarding education, regarding something as simple as what is considered an acceptable or normal name for boys or girls. Gender expectations overall have changed. Now, a lot of people feel that girls and boys are no longer socialized differently, that our society is so much more aware and enlightened, that equality between the sexes has progressed so much that this kind of thing is almost non-existent at this point. Yes, progress has been made, but the vast majority of social scientists in every discipline and others that conduct research in this area would disagree. Our society might not be as rigid in defining gender roles as we were historically speaking, but it still takes place in very, very subtle ways all the time. Now, what about adolescence and gender in traditional cultures? Well, when we look at them, especially in a traditional culture, gender roles and expectations affect virtually every single aspect of life, more so than in westernized cultures like ours. In many ways, once a child reaches adolescence and their gender socialization intensifies, we can see a lot more significance in terms of the role that gender plays. Typically, adolescent boys and girls in traditional cultures have very different lives and spend very little time together. And this is clearly sharply different from what all of us are used to, going to school with boys and girls all day, socializing with each other during school and outside of it, with no strict boundaries or even general beliefs that this is somehow not appropriate. In fact, those people who do not fully support the concept of a single gender classroom or a single gender school, so an all boys school or an all girls school, even argue that that's unnatural, that in the real world, males and females are together all the time. And if you separate them for their education, it's actually going to impair their ability to get along well. But in a traditional culture, for boys and girls, once they reach adolescence, they typically spend very little time together. And the expectations of their behavior as adolescents and the kind of work they do as adults are both sharply divided. So their daily lives really don't overlap very much. Again, very, very different from Canada and the United States. In addition, for both males and females, the requirements of them based on their gender tend to intensify quite a bit at adolescence compared to childhood. And in a traditional culture, you have very little room to deviate from what are firmly established norms. So in a traditional culture, socialization is more narrow to begin with, and especially in regards to gender, it's really narrow. Now, every culture has beliefs about what is or is not considered appropriate regarding appearance, roles in your own immediate family or in your community, occupations, general behavior for males and females overall. And remember, gender socialization refers to the process through which cultures communicate gender expectations to children and adolescents. At adolescence, this pressure, this communication really intensifies. This is called gender intensification hypothesis. And all this means is that gender differences become much more noticeable at adolescence, and gender expectations, adhering to gender expectations, really intensify. Now, according to your textbook, the official definition is both psychological and behavioral differences between males and females become much more pronounced. In other words, whether you're male or you're female, once you hit adolescence, the pressure to conform to a pre-prescribed masculine role because you're male, or to conform to a pre-prescribed feminine role because you're female, goes into overdrive compared to adulthood, and this is especially noticeable in traditional countries, traditional societies. Now, I'm going to talk quite a bit about this, and I think you'll agree that the pressure of gender really does kind of substantially increase at this stage of life. Now, it was John Hill and Mary Lynch who came up with this concept. And they say that it is more intense social pressure that causes gender intensification, not necessarily physical pressure, physical changes. They say that girls are subject to much more pressure than boys, that they are subject to much more intense gender socialization than boys. Not that boys don't experience it, but it's especially intense for girls. And because of these pressures, adolescents are thought to become more differentiated in their gender roles identity. They start to become much more masculine or much more feminine. Now, I've talked about how girls in traditional cultures typically work alongside others, adults, from an early age, often by 6 or 7, or maybe even earlier. They help to take care of younger siblings or extended family members. They cook like their mom does, obtain food with their mom, however that food is obtained. They make clothes, gather firewood. As children, they help with all of the jobs that are associated with running a household. By the time they reach adolescence, typically girls in traditional cultures are in a way almost like an equal partner with their mother regarding work. Now, their mom's still in charge. They're still the maternal authority, don't get me wrong, but they're really working just as much as their mom. So by the time they reach adolescence, for the most part, they've learned what they need to learn regarding childcare and running a household. And because of this, they contribute as much regarding work as their mom does. Now, an important difference here regarding gender in traditional societies is that while girls are spending all this time with their mom, boys typically have less contact with their families than girls do. So it's not that the girl is spending all this time with her mom and the boy is spending all this time with their dad. No, no, no. Girls are spending all their time with their mom, but boys tend to have more contact with their peers. So adolescent boys simply have less contact with their family compared to adolescent girls. Now, please don't mistake this interdependence between girls and their moms to mean that the girls are suppressed in their development in some way. And because of this, they're just raising them to be nice little girls who do whatever they're supposed to in the home. For example, in the Hopi tribe, which is a Native American tribe, mother-daughter relationships are extremely close, as I've described. But girls in this culture also reported being very confident and assertive. So being raised in a traditional manner with traditional gender roles does not necessarily equal being passive. It's not a matter of raising subservient, passive girls. It's a matter of raising them in a traditional manner. And let's be honest, we all have a tendency, whether we realize it or not, to look at another culture doing something differently and always consider our way to be best. But different is not the same as being less than. So still, in traditional cultures, the socialization of boys and adolescents is much more broad, while for girls, it either stays fairly narrow or even narrows some more than what it was in childhood with adolescence. So the social world expands for boys and contracts for girls. Now, something else that acts to narrow the socialization of girls in these cultures is the fact that they're beginning to mature sexually. So they are more tightly restricted because of this new sexual maturity that is starting to occur. Again, more so for boys. In a traditional culture, boys are allowed and sometimes even expected to gain sexual experience before marriage. Now, some traditional cultures will allow this for girls, but in others, if they lose their virginity before marriage, they could be severely punished and they may even be put to death. So, of course, one of the practical questions that will probably pop into your head is, in those cultures where boys are expected to gain sexual experience and girls are expected to keep their virginity until marriage, who exactly do the boys gain this experience with? Well, it may be older women who are known to be friendly with younger boys or prostitutes. Um, so that's how that happens. Now, your textbook provides an example that really does a great job of demonstrating how socialization regarding gender in traditional cultures occurs. And this was a book published by Beverly Chinnis called I'm going to mess up this phrase, the Istanas Zapotecs, a matrifocal culture of Mexico. Now, this is a society, a culture that can be traced back at least 2,500 years in southern Mexico. So the little red square on the map here, this is where they would have been found. And in this culture, it's really based around a central town or village. Uh, these people have an agricultural basis and this would include things like corn or beans or squash, some coffee, wheat, or sugar cane, and they hunt and fish as well. In the particular village the author studied, she said it's very common before puberty for girls in the village to be sent to the town plaza to shop for food. So it's not going in to buy something with a set price, it's you'd have to negotiate the price. And she said in doing this, the girls develop very, very good skills at addition and subtraction. They become very, very shrewd shoppers. And all of these are skills they're going to use for the rest of their life. These are all skills they're going to use when they have their own household and are a mother or a wife themselves. Also take note from this that this is very different from most of Canada in that it's not common to send a prepubescent girl to the grocery store to get things on their own. So our expectations of what a girl at this age could or should be doing are very different. Now, in traditional Mexican culture, virginity is very important for girls. So once a girl in this village reaches puberty, they're no longer allowed to go to the town plaza alone. Instead, they're kept under much closer surveillance by their family. And this is done in order to reduce the likelihood of them being sexually active before marriage. So in this culture, maintaining virginity is taken very, very seriously. It's highly valued. And in this village, girls spend most of their time learning how to run a household, essentially practicing the skills that they'll need to have as an adult. So when they're younger, middle childhood, that's when you care for older siblings and learn how to care for children. But at adolescence, that's when their responsibilities change. And now they're focusing on how to actually run a household. School would simply not be a consistent part of a child's adolescence experiences in this culture, in this village. If a girl did go to school, it would be for no more than a year to learn only the basics she'd need to know to run her household effectively as a married woman. So from about 10 to 16, girls in this village simply do not interact with boys outside their family very much. Even talking to them would be strongly discouraged. And in all seriousness, because this is a small village, it's pretty easy to monitor people's behaviors. Around 16, a girl in this village is considered to be ready for marriage. She is of marriageable age. So at this point, she's allowed to attend certain things, but only under the supervision of an older female relative. So her mom, her grandmother, maybe an aunt. So there is no freedom for a female adolescent, socially speaking, with the opposite sex. It just isn't there. And even with other girls, social opportunities would be very, very limited. But a girl would, at age 16, be permitted to attend an event that takes place every Sunday evening called a paseo. And what happens here is the people of the village would gather in a public square and walk around the plaza in two groups, a circle. The inner group would go one way and the outer group would go the other way so that you'd be facing people. And this is really significant, not just because it's something to do, but attending the paseo every week would allow young people to see each other, to observe each other, maybe even say something to each other. In other words, you could check people out. Now, you'd still be completely supervised. You would never have an opportunity to spend time alone with a boy, but you would be able to see who was in the village around your own age. And for the boys, they could do the same. So what happens then if a boy notices a girl and he's interested in her? Well, he'll begin to wait outside her home on Sunday evenings and hope that her family will allow him to escort the girl to the next paseo. So in this traditional village, it is always the boy who initiates a courtship, never the girl. It's simply not possible for her to initiate any kind of possible relationship. But she does have the option of saying no, of discouraging a boy that shows interest in her. So it's not up to her family. She doesn't have to attend the paseo with anyone who shows up, even if her family grants their permission. And she doesn't have to consider somebody a future marital partner just because he presents himself. And that's what he's doing when he presents himself, presenting himself for a possible future marital relationship. Now, if she doesn't discourage him, he may spend several evenings each week outside her family home, just waiting to see her for a moment, even just to catch a glimpse of her. So he knows he might not even be able to talk to her. He's lucky if he'll get to say a few words. But this is a requirement for him to show consistent effort. After several months of this, so he's got to be persistent. It's not a quick process. It doesn't happen in a few weeks' time. Representatives from the boy's family will approach the girl's family and ask for their consent for the two to be married. No, the girl is not asked directly. There's no proposal directly to her. And her family may not even ask how she feels about him if she wants to marry him. The fact that she consented to be courted by the boy in the first place is considered her consent for a potential future marriage. Now, what happens if she decides she really doesn't like him and really doesn't want to marry him and her family likes him? I don't know. But at the same time, knowing that consent to be courted may in the future be considered consent to be married means taking what we would consider a simple, irreversible decision much more seriously. You know, we're used to dating somebody to determine if we want to marry them, and this is kind of the reverse. So overall, what this example demonstrates are several themes that are often found in the socialization of girls in a traditional culture. They are responsible for work in the home from an early age, not just a few chores, but from an early age truly contributing. They have a particularly close relationship with their female family members, in part because they work so closely together. Adolescence is viewed as a time to prepare for being an adult, which means marriage and gender-specific work. And puberty, the beginning of which is determined, of course, by her first menstrual cycle, is thus extremely significant. And it really does cause differences in how she is perceived by everybody around her, how she is treated, and expectations of her.